In this video, we'll go through some examples of homework setting based on some discussions with teachers. So in my homepage, you can come to the parts below. Here, you can see a link about setting exercises for learning and assessment. So you can open this link. And then in our F-Note file, I have several PDF files. The first one is about homework setting and based on some discussions with teachers. So this is the PDF file. If you try to download it and open it, then you will see the slides here. And so this is about two topics, and we include some examples of homework that's suggested by teachers, and we try to talk about in what way we can set exercises suitable for developments of learning and assessment in ordinary classroom. So we are talking about ordinary homework. Okay? So the two topics that we'll go through will be here. One is about exterior angles of triangle. The other one is about perfect square polynomial factorization, both in Key Stage 3. So you can see that this is a little bit more details about the first topic, using angles properties. It's talk about the relation between exterior angles and the two interior angles of a triangle. So that is so it may be covered in one lesson usually in our secondary classroom. And then at the end of the lessons, so what homework exercise would you assign to the students? Now before you move on, I suggest you to pause for a while and think about it on your own first. What exercise you will think of, so you can put it down on a piece of paper before you go on. This is what I asked some teachers to do during a workshop. So I asked groups of teachers try to suggest some kind of questions that they immediately think of that can be used as homework. They are not using any particular textbook during the discussion, so they try to think of something from their mind, maybe something common or familiar they can immediately talk about. So before you move on, maybe you can pause for a while to think about it yourself, what kind of questions that you will consider. Okay, if you finish thinking about yourself, then you can go on to look at the following set of examples provided by the teachers. Right? So I collect some examples from the teachers during a workshop. And so it includes contribution from 3 groups of teachers. So you can see some simple questions that they drop down on a piece of paper, and then I try to construct it here with computer in the slide. But basically they are coming from the sketches on piece of paper. Right? I just redraw it in the computer here to show you. So this is one set of questions the teachers think of. Okay, so find the angle of x here. This is find the angles of A, question 1 and question 2. They also label this as level 1 questions. And then same set from the same set of teachers, level 2 questions. This is what they suggest about finding this sum and also finding angle A in this figure. And this is set 2, right, from another group of teachers. So this question 1 and question 2, find the angle here and find the angle here. Okay, this continuation of set 2, question 3, and question 4. Still one more from set 2. Okay, so find the sum of these 3 angles. Now we come to set 3, the third group of teachers. Okay, so that is the first questions they talk about. They ask the student to classify the angles, whether they're exterior or not exterior angles. And then continue with question 2 in set 3. So these are the questions they suggest. Find the angle A. Here there's several steps in doing a proof. And also the final part of set 3 is another question, similar to the one in set 1 actually. Okay, finding the sum of these angles. Now at this stage, okay, you can look at the 3 sets again. Maybe you try to think about it. To what extent these exercises suggested by 3 groups of teachers are similar? Or do you notice any difference between them, between one set and another? Are they very similar or are they very different? What do you think? Okay. So let's go back to a part of this, okay? So my suggestion is that, well, it depends on what you think, but I would suggest that quite a lot of questions are about finding the missing angle, just like this one. And they also have a tendency to group the question into levels, from level 1 to level 2 to level 3, or in terms of the levels of difficulty. And one exception, perhaps, is this question from set 3. I think is rather different from the other questions, and it is also not so typical in our textbook, right? So how do you think about the relevance of this question as a homework? So what I want to point out is that quite often we may be thinking of quite the same kind of question, same kind of standard question common in our textbook, and as a kind of practice for students, and also putting it in the orders of level of difficulty. But what I want to point out here is that in what way the homework will also support the learning particularly from the point of view of formative assessment, right? So this question may be a little bit from the others because it focuses on how far they understand the concept of exterior angles, right? Particularly by asking them to classify them. So it's not merely about how to use the formula, or even how to use the theorem to solve problem or to find unknowns. Right? Otherwise, you will see that most of the students will feel that the theorem looks like a formula for finding unknowns only, right? Instead of thinking about the geometrical properties. So this is quite often missing in our textbook, right? And so, but if you try to start from the point of view of assessment for learning, and also from the point of view of developing the concepts, then you will reconsider the types of exercise that you can assign to the student. And in fact, there can be a variety of questions that you can consider. Finally, regarding the level of difficulty, this is also common among our exercise. We tend to put some difficult question at the end to challenge some of the students. But bear in mind, you may think about in what way this challenging question is suitable or appropriate for learning of the whole class. Okay? Is it simply just giving something to occupy some faster students, or they contribute to the concepts of learning for most of the students? So that is also a question that we may consider. Right? So it's not necessary, and it's about making some only very challenging questions at the end in order to motivate the student to learn more. Although I also consider this kind of questions quite interesting and challenging for some students, obviously. Okay, I also provide another set of questions for comparison. I extracted from some other teaching materials, and you can compare with the previous ones that you have just gone through. For example, this is first question. So we can give them a picture and ask them what's wrong with this figure. You can ask the student to describe in what way this diagram looks a bit unusual, okay, or according to what they know about exterior angles. Another question here is that, can a triangle have two acute exterior angles? So how would they talk about it? How would they explain or describe what they think? And this one is about construction, or maybe simply sketching. Try to draw an example, give an examples in terms of drawing. Can you construct a triangle with an acute exterior angle and mark that exterior angle? Right? So this can be another type of task that we can consider. Particularly, we can provide different means for the student to express their thoughts and thinking and further develop their thinking. Another question here is that angle X in the figure is an exterior angle of a triangle. But which triangle? So you can ask the student to name the triangle in which X is an exterior angle of that triangle. Once they name a triangle, we can talk about then which are the interior opposite angle. So we can make use of this question to draw attention to the angles relation, and also emphasize more about the descriptions of the angle relations, right? And also interpretations of the diagram. So these can be combined with the usual kind of tasks that you can see in the textbook, which is very much refined, restricted to quite a lot of calculations and findings of unknowns only in the common textbook exercises. But on the other hand, to what extent we provide means for the student to develop their concept. So that is the things that we will further consider. Now look at another topic. Now we move on to another topic in algebra. So factorize polynomials by using perfect square expressions. There's a little bit more detail from the curriculum. We're talking about some identities. Okay? Perfect square identity, that means a plus b whole squares equal to a squared plus 2ab plus b squared. And we are talking about factorization. That means if you're given a trinomials of perfect square form, then can you write it as a square of an expression? Now, so this is another topic in algebra that can be covered in one lesson usually. And can you think of some exercises or homework at the end of this lesson? So just like the previous discussion, I will show you some teachers' suggestions later, and then you can try to compare or analyze their suggestions. Before that, you may try to pause for a while and think about it on your own first, right? And see whether you have some brief ideas in mind, what kind of exercises that you may consider. So if you're finished, then maybe you can now move on to look at the set of the questions from the teachers that I have collected. So they also come from 3 groups of teachers. This is one set of questions by one group of teachers. They also particularly label them as level 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, and this is the heading. This is the question they also put down. The terms they use is called factorize the following. This is the second set. Also, the teachers immediately write down things like this: factorize the following. And then you can see lists of examples. And how about set 3? Another group of teachers are working independently. Interestingly, the format of the questions are very similar. Although you can see that there may be different levels of difficulty, but in general, they're moving from simple to complicated polynomial in this factorization exercise. And so, obviously, this time, when you look at the 3 sets, I think you will see more similarity rather than difference. Okay? It also suggests that most of the teachers may be thinking of very similar kind of questions as exercise. And also, another point I would like to highlight is that what's the purpose of this exercise? Is it merely for developing their skills in factorizing more and more complicated polynomials? Or are they focusing on the concept, right, of this kind of polynomials and factorization, particularly when they first learn about this concept? Okay. So I like to show you another set of materials collected from another sources, right, for comparison, which shows that it is very different from the examples given above by the teachers. So for example, this one is extracted from a book from Harold Jacobs in 1979. So they first start with this question: if possible, write each of the following as a square of a monomial. That means the student should be able to say that 9x squared is the square of 3x. Similarly, maybe they will say that this x to the power 16 is the square of x to the power 8. So these are questions trying to highlight the importance of recognizing squares of monomial. Otherwise, they cannot move on to factorize successfully the other trinomials as perfect square. So we can make use of this to focus on one fundamental concept, right, or ideas, how far the student can grasp it before they pick up something else in the chapters. And then the second one is about factorizing all these polynomials, and right, it's a square binomial. But note carefully, not everyone can be factorized as a square. So the students are also required to distinguish which one is a square and which one is not a square. Now, so you can compare with the examples suggested by the teachers above. None of the questions suggested by the teachers point at these ideas. That means how far the student can distinguish when one trinomial is a square or when it is not a square. And I can't even find this in our local textbook, actually. Right? It seems that once we tell them how to factorize, then all the work is about factorizing given square, right? Given trinomials, which are squares. But by doing so, the students may not pay attention, for example, to the middle term, because you can see that they can do it in a rather mechanical way. If you assume that everyone is just focusing on the first term and the second term, the first term and the third term, they can already write down the answer. Right? If all of them are about just writing down the square. But in this one, we are asking them to pay attention to the whole expression and then try to think about it. So which one is a square and which one is not. In fact, knowing which one is a square is also part of the understanding, right, of factorizing this kind of polynomial. Right? Otherwise, they may not know completely the nature of the work that they are doing. So some extension based on the same idea. Right? So these are the missing terms. And suppose that all these are squares, then what should be the missing terms? Right? Can the student try to complete it based on their understanding of the square polynomials? So this is another alternative, and so it requires the student to match the expressions with the diagram. So several diagrams given in this lesson illustrate the multiplication. Now, of course, it also depends on whether you use this kind of diagram in your teaching as well. If this is included, then it can also be considered as part of their exercise or homework to reinforce their understanding. So although some teachers use it as a kind of explanation, right? However, not many will consider use it further in their homework, right? To see how far the student can get the idea, right? By looking at this kind of pictures or reasoning about these pictures. So in this is a question that we may ask the student to write down the corresponding expressions represented by these figures. Or we can ask them to draw a diagram, okay, in a similar way based on these expressions. So this is the last question I share with you here. So you will find that all these are alternative or suggesting quite a variety of exercises that we can consider. Although usually we may be focused on a very narrow range of exercise in the homework, particularly we may consider mostly the homework as a kind of practice rather than means for learning or further development of concept. Okay, so this can help you to understand, to rethink the purpose and natures of the homework and what does it mean assessment for learning in this case.